Experts believe this 1910 studio photograph was calm and ordinary until they noticed what the young girl was holding. Dr. Maya Johnson's hands trembled slightly as she held the image beneath the afternoon sunlight pouring through her office window at Emory University in Atlanta. The picture had cost her $300 at a weekend estate sale in Decatur, but something about it had drawn her in the instant she spotted it among dusty boxes filled with forgotten memories. The photograph showed a black family of three, carefully posed in what looked like a professional studio setting from 1910. The father stood tall and dignified in a dark suit, one hand resting gently on the back of an ornate chair. The mother sat gracefully, her posture straight and perfect, wearing a high-collared white blouse trimmed with delicate lace. Between them stood a young girl, perhaps 8 years old, dressed in a spotless white gown, with ribbons tied neatly in her carefully styled hair. Maya had examined hundreds of photographs from this period during her 15 years, researching African-American history in the post-Reconstruction South. Most images from that era were stiff and formal, where black families presented themselves with fierce pride to challenge the cruel stereotypes of the time. At first glance, this photograph seemed no different, yet Maya could not shake the uneasy feeling that something was not quite right. The expressions on their faces carried an unusual intensity. They were not smiling, yet not fully solemn either, but something in between. The girl's eyes appeared to stare directly through the camera, through time itself, as if she were trying to send an urgent message across the decades. Placing the photograph carefully on her desk, Maya pulled out her digital magnification device, a tool she had used many times to study historical documents and images. As she adjusted the lens and brought different parts of the picture into clear focus, she examined each detail with care. The painted studio backdrop showing a peaceful garden scene, the fine quality of the family's clothing, the photographer's signature faintly visible in the corner. Then she shifted her focus to the girl's hands folded neatly in front of her white dress. Maya's breath caught in her throat. There, partly hidden by the careful pose and the grain of the old photograph, was something she had not seen before. The girl's right hand gripped a small metal object, no more than 2 inches long. Maya increased the magnification, her heart pounding faster. The object became clearer. Curved metal, snapped at one end, with what looked like part of a hinge still attached. Her professional training told her immediately what she was seeing, but her mind resisted the meaning. It was a shackle, a child-sized shackle broken cleanly in the middle. The peaceful studio portrait suddenly changed before her eyes. This was no longer just another formal family photograph, meant to show dignity and respectability. This was something far more powerful. A careful and dangerous act of testimony, hidden in plain sight for more than a century. Maya spent the next 3 days barely sleeping. Completely absorbed by the photograph, she canceled 2 lectures and ignored the growing pile of emails in her inbox, turning her office into a temporary research center instead. The walls soon filled with printouts, handwritten notes, and timeline charts as she began assembling the historical background of this mysterious image. The photographer's mark in the corner read, "Sterling and Associates, Memphis, Tennessee, 1910. Maya searched digital archives of Memphis business directories from that period and discovered that Sterling and Associates had operated a portrait studio on Beale Street from 1908 to 1915, serving both white and black clients. That was unusual for the time, and suggested the photographer may have been more open-minded than most. She contacted colleagues across the country, sending high-resolution scans of the photograph to experts in early 20th century photography, material culture, and African-American history. Within 48 hours, her suspicions were confirmed. Dr. Robert Chen at Howard University, a specialist in historical restraint devices, studied the magnified image and replied with a serious message. "Maya, what you found matches juvenile restraints used in the convict leasing system and apprenticeship programs that spread across the South after Reconstruction. These were common in agricultural and domestic labor arrangements, where children were bound to employers under legal excuses. The break pattern suggests it was forced off rather than unlocked." "Where did you get this?" Maya stared at his words, feeling the heavy weight of history pressing down on her. She had studied the convict leasing system in depth, the brutal practice where Southern states leased prisoners, mostly black men arrested on false charges, to private companies for labor. But the apprenticeship system that trapped children was less recorded, more hidden in the shadows of history. She reached for her worn copy of Slavery by Another Name, by Douglas Blackmun, and turned to the chapters about child labor. The system had been both simple and cruel. After slavery was abolished, Southern lawmakers passed apprenticeship laws that allowed courts to bind black children to white employers if their parents were judged unable to support them, a decision often made unfairly and maliciously. These children, some only 5 years old, were essentially enslaved under legal cover and forced to work without pay until adulthood. Maya returned to the photograph with new understanding, studying the family's clothing more closely. The quality was too fine for people just emerging from deep poverty. The father's suit showed skilled tailoring. The mother's blouse displayed expensive lace, and the girl's white dress was flawless. This suggested the family had achieved some level of financial stability or had saved carefully for this portrait. Why would they dare include such a bold and dangerous object in an official photograph? In 1910, Memphis, openly showing evidence of forced labor or criticizing the social system, could bring deadly consequences. Black families lived under constant threat of violence, false charges, and re-enslavement through the justice system. Maya realized she needed to understand Memphis in 1910 to fully interpret the photograph. She spent the next week buried in historical records, building a clearer picture of the city and the risks this family would have faced. Memphis at that time was a city full of contrasts. Beale Street flourished as a center of black culture, business, and music, where entrepreneurs built companies and formed strong community spaces. Yet this success existed inside a larger structure meant to control and exploit. Tennessee had enforced Jim Crow laws harshly, and any economic progress black families made was constantly at risk. The city's African-American population had grown greatly since the Civil War, but so had the systems of oppression. Vagrancy laws allowed police to arrest black men simply for being unemployed, then lease them to farms and factories. Debt peonage trapped families in cycles of forced labor through unfair contracts and inflated charges. The apprenticeship system quietly removed children from the ear homes under the excuse of education or job training. Maya found a 1909 report written by a northern journalist who had investigated labor conditions near Memphis. His account described farms in nearby counties where black children worked alongside adults in conditions almost identical to slavery. The children had been apprenticed by county judges, often without their parents' knowledge or permission, sometimes taken directly from their homes for small accusations, or simply because they were poor. One line made Maya's blood run cold. The children wore metal cuffs at night to prevent escape. During the day, the restraints were taken off for work, but kept close as a warning. Several children had scars on their wrists and ankles from wearing these devices for long periods. She compared this information with court records from Shelby County, where Memphis was located. Between 1900 and 1915, more than 300 black children had been legally apprenticed. Their futures were recorded in dry legal language that barely hinted at the suffering behind the words. Many entries listed only first names and ages, making it nearly impossible to trace what happened to them, or whether they ever returned to their families. Maya began searching for families who might have escaped this system around 1910, families who could have had both the courage and the means to commission a professional portrait. She needed names, addresses, any clue that could connect to the photograph on her desk. In the Tennessee State Archives digital collection, she discovered Beale Street business advertisements from 1910. One stood out: Sterling and Associates portraits of distinction for families of character. Discretion assured. That final phrase seemed unusual. Why advertise discretion unless clients needed protection? Maya contacted the Memphis Public Library's history department, and a librarian named James Porter replied with interest. He explained that Sterling and Associates had a reputation within the black community for being respectful and trustworthy, willing to document realities that other photographers refused to capture. They photographed families after funerals when other studios declined. They documented black-owned businesses before they were destroyed. If someone wanted a photograph that revealed a truth others preferred hidden, Sterling was the place to go. 2 weeks into her research, Maya finally found her first significant lead. She had been studying Memphis city directories, church records, and census data, searching for black families living near Beale Street, around 1910 who had a daughter about 8 years old. The 1910 census listed thousands of black residents in Memphis, but most records were brief and incomplete. Then she discovered something promising in the archives of Second Congregational Church, a historic black congregation active since Reconstruction. Among the membership rolls, she noticed a family entry that made her pause, sensing she might finally be close to uncovering the hidden story behind the photograph. Fr. On 1910, one entry contained a small note written in the margin. Family reunited July 1910 after return from Fayette County. The record listed Samuel Price, age 34, laborer, Clara Price, age 29, laundress, and Ruth Price, age 8. The note about coming back from Fayette County was unusual enough to draw attention. Why would a church clerk mention where a family had been? Mia's hands trembled as she searched for Fayette County documents. Located about 50 miles east of Memphis, Fayette County was largely agricultural with a complex racial past. After Reconstruction, it had become known for unfair labor systems that targeted the black community. In a set of county court papers from 1905, Maya found what she had feared most. Order of Apri. Enticeship. Ruth Price, female child of color aged 3 years, to be apprenticed to the household of Mr. William Dawson, farmer, for the purpose of learning domestic work and receiving Christian instruction until age 18. Parents Samuel Price and Clara Price, judged unable to provide proper support. Maya read the paper 3 times, feeling nauseated. Ruth had been only 3 years old when she was taken from her parents. The legal wording was cold and formal, but Maya could picture the moment clearly. A small child pulled from her mother's arms, a father helpless to prevent it, trapped in a system built to tear families apart. She searched for more details about William Dawson and found census listings describing him as a farmer, with 200 acres and several apprenticed laborers, a polite term that barely hid the truth. There were no records of him ever facing charges for abuse, but that meant little in a world where the pain of black children carried no legal value. Yet Ruth had somehow made it back to her family. She had been freed, and in July 1910, only weeks after the family's return to Memphis, they had walked into Sterling and Associates' studio and ordered a portrait that would stand as lasting evidence of what Ruth had survived. Maya needed to understand how they had regained custody of her and why they had dared to record it so openly. She contacted descendants of Second Congregational Church members, historians who focused on Tennessee labor history, and genealogists who might help trace the Price family forward through the years. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. Dr. Patricia Lawson, a retired history professor in Memphis who specialized in black women's activism during the Jim Crow period, replied to Maya's message with a fascinating email. I recall hearing stories about a group of black women in Memphis who quietly worked to rescue children. Rome illegal apprenticeships. They had no official name, no public position, but they were successful. Check the papers of Ida Wells. Maya knew of Ida B. Wells, the brave journalist and activist who had exposed lynching and fought strongly against racial injustice. Wells had lived in Memphis before being forced out by threats in 1892, yet she kept ties to the city and returned from time to time. In archived letters at the University of Chicago, Maya found correspondence Wells had written in 1910, mentioning her work with women in Memphis who were freeing children from bondage disguised as apprenticeship. The letter avoided clear details. Wells wrote carefully, aware that her mail might be opened, but it confirmed that such a hidden network existed. Maya went back to church documents, this time studying women's auxiliary groups, missionary circles, and charity committees. In the minutes from the Second Congregational Church Women's Mission Society from 1909, she discovered a note. Committee to visit afflicted families. Clara Price, to be assisted in her distress regarding her daughter's unlawful detention. The story began to come together. Clara Price had turned to churchwomen who understood how to move carefully through the dangerous system of Jim Crow justice. These women knew the weaknesses in the law and how to use them wisely. Maya located court records from March 1910, showing that Samuel Price had submitted a petition in Shelby County Court, asking for his daughter's return from apprenticeship in Fayette County. The petition stated he had gained steady work with the Memphis Street Railway Company, and that his wife managed a successful laundry business from their home. proving they were able to support their child. Usually, such requests from black parents were ignored or rejected, but this petition included something rare. It came with an affidavit from a white lawyer, named Henry Thompson, confirming the Price family's good character and financial stability. Thompson's name appeared in other cases as someone who occasionally defended black citizens of Memphis, something uncommon and controversial at the time. The court approved the petition in May 1910, ordering Ruth's return to her parents. But Mia understood the legal ruling was only part of the truth. Someone had to physically bring Ruth back from Dawson's farm, and Mia doubted he had surrendered her peacefully. In a small Fayette County newspaper from June 1910, she found a short article. Disturbance at Dawson Farm. County sheriff called to restore order after Memphis party arrived claiming custody of Negro child apprentice. Matter resolved, according to court order. No charges filed. That brief notice hid what must have been a frightening encounter. Maya pictured Clara Price, perhaps joined by church women and attorney Thompson, arriving at Dawson's property with official papers demanding her daughter's release. The presence of a white lawyer may have been the only barrier against violence. Maya wanted to understand the meaning of the broken shackle in the photograph. Why had Ruth held it during the portrait? What message were they sending? She consulted Dr. Angela Foster, a colleague who specialized in African American visual culture and resistance during the Jim Crow era. Angela traveled to Atlanta to study the photograph directly, bringing advanced imaging tools to examine details unseen by the naked eye. "This is remarkable," Angela said while studying the enlarged image on her laptop. "Notice how carefully Ruth is holding the shackle. Her fingers are arranged so it can be clearly seen, even though it is small enough that many viewers might overlook it. This was not by chance. This was deliberate testimony." They re-examined other features of the image. The father's hand grip, ping. The chair was not just a standard pose. His fingers were tight, holding the wood firmly. The mother's face, which Maya first thought showed calm dignity, also revealed defiance in her jaw and a direct challenge in her gaze. They knew exactly what they were doing, Angela continued. In 1910, there was no promise this photograph would ever be widely viewed, but they created it anyway. They were recording the truth for the future, perhaps for Ruth when she grew older, perhaps for history itself. This was their form of resistance, refusing to let what happened to their child be erased. Angela pointed at the broken end of the shackle. "See how clean the break is? That was not simple rust or damage. Someone cut through that metal on purpose, likely using a hacksaw. That required time and strength. I believe Ruth, or someone who supported her, kept this piece as proof and as a symbol." Maya felt tears rising in her eyes. The bravery it must have taken for Clara and Samuel Price to order this photograph, knowing it might put their family at risk if seen by the wrong people, was almost impossible to imagine. In 1910, Memphis, openly showing evidence of resistance to white authority, could lead to arrest, violence, or worse. Still, they had done it. They dressed in their best clothing, brought their daughter to the most respected studio they could find, and posed for a portrait that permanently recorded both their dignity and their courage. The broken shackle was Ruth's evidence that she had endured, that they had brought her home, that the system had not destroyed them. Maya and Angela spent many hours discussing the historical meaning of the photograph. Images like this were extremely rare. Most records about child apprenticeship came from white officials, or documents that reduced the cruelty involved. To possess proof from the viewpoint of a family who had suffered through IT and escaped was almost unheard of. "You must discover what happened to Ruth after this picture was taken," Angela said. "Did she survive? Did she live a full and meaningful life? The story cannot end here." Following Ruth Price's life after 1910 was difficult but possible. Maya began with census records, tracking the family over the years. The 1920 census listed Samuel, Clara, and Ruth still in Memphis, with Samuel working as a railway porter and Clara continuing her laundry business. Ruth was recorded as 18 years old and employed as a teacher at a colored school. That detail mattered deeply. For a black girl in the South who had endured years of forced labor to gain enough education to teach, showed remarkable strength and support from her parents. Maya wondered if Ruth's experience had inspired her to help other children receive the education she herself had once been denied. Maya contacted the Memphis Board of Education archives and located teacher employment files. Ruth Price had taught at Lemoyne Elementary School, a school for black children founded by the American Missionary Association. Her file included a short handwritten application from 1918 stating she had completed normal school training and had experience working with young students. There was one more document in the file, a letter of recommendation from attorney Henry Thompson, the same lawyer who had helped bring Ruth back from her apprenticeship 8 years earlier. He wrote, "Miss Ruth Price shows outstanding character and a deep commitment to education. Despite serious difficulties in her early years, she pursued education with remarkable determination. She will be a valuable addition to any institution fortunate enough to hire her." Maya felt a bond forming across the years. These were no longer just names in files or lines in official documents. They were real human beings who had struggled, endured, and created meaningful lives despite organized efforts to break them. The 1930 census listed Clara Price, now a widow, living with Ruth, who was recorded as married to Thomas Williams, a postal employee. Samuel had died in 1927, according to records from Elmwood Cemetery. Maya went to the cemetery on a cold morning in February, walking past worn headstones until she located Samuel Price's grave, a plain granite marker with his name, his dates, and the words "beloved father" and "husband." She remained there for a long while, thinking about the man in the photograph who had fought so hard to bring his daughter back home. Samuel had lived 17 more years after that portrait was taken, long enough to watch Ruth grow up, marry, and begin her own family life. That was a kind of triumph, even if no history book ever mentioned it. Maya kept tracing Ruth's path through marriage licenses, city records, and newspaper clippings. Ruth Williams had worked as a teacher for 32 years, retiring in 1950. She was mentioned in several newspaper pieces about Negro education in Memphis, always described as committed and highly respected. In a 1945 Memphis newspaper article discussing progress in the black community, Ruth was quoted saying, "Education is freedom. Every child deserves the opportunity to learn and grow without interference or exploitation." Maya's research took an unexpected direction when she shared her discoveries on a genealogy forum focused on Memphis families. Within 3 days, she received an email from a woman named Linda Harris in Nashville, who had been researching her own ancestry. "I believe Ruth Price Williams was my great-grandmother," Linda wrote. "My grandmother, Dorothy Williams, was Ruth's daughter. I have some of Ruth's personal belongings, including a box of old photographs and documents. If you are researching the same Ruth Price, I would be glad to meet you." Maya drove to Nashville the next Saturday, her heart beating fast with anticipation. Linda, a woman in her 60s with gentle eyes and the same determined look that Ruth had, welcomed her into a warm home filled with family photographs from different generations. "I never met my great-grandmother," Linda explained as they sat together in the living room. "She passed away in 1969 before I was born, but my grandmother Dorothy told me many stories about her, about how strong she was, and how she valued education above everything else." Linda brought out an old cardboard box. Inside were precious items, report cards from Ruth's teaching years, a Bible with family names written inside the front pages, letters, and several photographs. One photo showed an elderly Ruth in the 1960s, standing at the front of a classroom, her expression both proud and kind. Grandmother Dorothy said Ruth rarely spoke about her childhood. Linda continued. She would grow quiet if anyone asked. But once, when Dorothy was a teenager, Ruth shared something that stayed with her. She said, "I was taken from my parents when I was very young, and I worked on a farm where children were not treated kindly. But my mother never stopped searching for me, and when I returned home, I promised myself I would help other children have better lives." Maya felt a chill run through her. Linda did not know about the photograph Maya had discovered, or about the broken shackle visible in Ruth's hand. This family memory, passed down through generations, confirmed everything Maya had uncovered. At the bottom of the box, carefully wrapped in thin tissue paper, Maya found something that made her catch her breath. It was a small, curved piece of metal, broken, with part of a hinge still attached. It was the other half of the shackle from the photograph. "Do you know what this is?" Maya asked softly. Linda shook her head. Ed. It was among Ruth's belongings after she died. My grandmother kept it, but she never knew what it was. She thought it might have been part of an old farm tool or something Ruth saved from childhood. Maya explained her findings and showed Linda the photograph on her laptop, zooming in on Ruth's hand holding the broken shackle. As understanding slowly appeared on Linda's face, tears rolled down both of their cheeks. She kept it her entire life, Linda whispered. 60 years. Why? As a reminder, Maya said gently, of what she survived and of what her parents fought to rescue her from. Maybe also as proof in case anyone ever doubted her story. Maya understood that the story had to be shared. With Linda's permission and partnership, she began organizing an exhibit at Emory University's African American History Center. The exhibit would present the 1910 photograph, along with historical background, documents from Maya's research, and artifacts from Ruth's life, including both pieces of the shackle, reunited after more than 100 years. The preparation lasted 6 months. Maya worked closely with curators, preservation experts, and designers to create an exhibit that honored the Price family's bravery, while educating visitors about the larger system of child exploitation that had trapped thousands of black children in the post-Reconstruction South. Linda became an essential collaborator, sharing family stories, photographs, and details that deepened the narrative. Together they contacted other descendants of members of the Second Congregational Church, many of whom told stories about the network of women who had worked to free apprenticed children. Some families had their own painful histories of children taken away, and in heartbreaking cases, never brought back home. Maya also connected with historians studying similar systems in other southern states. The apprenticeship system that had ensnared Ruth existed throughout the South, from Virginia to Texas, yet it remained one of the least examined parts of Jim Crow oppression. Many scholars appreciated the records Maya had gathered, recognizing their importance for future research. In September, the exhibit opened with a ceremony attended by more than 200 people, including Linda and dozens of other descendants of Memphis families affected by the apprenticeship system. Local news coverage drew even more attention, and within weeks the story spread across the country. Maya stood in front of the displayed photograph of the Price family and addressed the audience. When we look at old photographs, we often notice only the surface details, the clothing, the studio setting, the formal poses chosen for the camera. But this photograph asks us to look more carefully. It asks us to see the broken shackle in Ruth's hand and understand what it means. It shows that resistance took many forms, that families pushed back against injustice in every way they could, and that truth finds a way to survive, even when powerful systems try to bury it. Linda spoke after her, her voice steady though filled with emotion. My great-grandmother Ruth lived to the age of 73. She taught hundreds of children, loved her family deeply, and created a life of dignity and purpose. The system tried to take her childhood, but it did not succeed in taking her future. She wanted us to remember that. That is why she kept the shackle. That is why her parents risked everything for that photograph. They believed that one day, someone would understand. 6 months after the exhibit opened, Maya published her research in the Journal of Southern History, adding to a growing field of scholarship examining post-Reconstruction child labor exploitation. The article encouraged renewed efforts to document these neglected histories, and several universities began projects to uncover similar stories in their own areas. Linda established a scholarship in Ruth's name at Lemoyne-Owen College, the institution that had developed from the school where Ruth once taught. The scholarship supported students pursuing degrees in education, especially those who had overcome major hardships. At the first award ceremony, Linda displayed the 1910 photograph prominently alongside Ruth's words, "Education is freedom." Maya continued her investigation, finding records of 13 other children who had been apprenticed in Fayette County between 1900 and 1915, and later brought back by their families with help from the Memphis Women's Network. Each story represented courage and resistance that had remained undocumented until now. She began gathering these stories into a book, determined to give voice to families whose struggles had been erased from official accounts. The photograph itself, now placed on permanent display at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, became an important symbol in discussions about hidden histories and visual resistance. School groups visiting the museum often paused in front of it, Teachers explaining how people found ways to speak truth to power, even in dangerous times. On a warm afternoon in spring, nearly a year after she had first bought the photograph at that estate sale, Maya returned to her office at Emory. The walls, once covered with research notes and timelines, were now clear, yet the impact of the work remained strong. She had invitations to speak across the country, offers to collaborate on related projects, and messages from individuals eager to share their own family histories. She carefully took out the original photograph, preserved in archival protection, and studied it once again. Ruth's eyes still seemed to gaze across time, but now Maya fully understood the message they carried. It was not only the story of one child's suffering and survival, but a broader truth about resilience, parental love, and the lengths people will go to protect their children and guard their dignity. Samuel and Clara Price had ensured that their daughter's story would endure. They had recorded it in the most lasting form available to them, a formal portrait meant to survive fading memories, rumors, and the slow loss of oral tradition. The broken shackle in Ruth's hand stood as their testimony, their proof, their refusal to let injustice remain unseen. As Maya switched off the lights in her office that evening, she thought about all the other photographs resting in attics, estate sales, and forgotten boxes, images that might hold similar secrets, waiting for someone patient enough to notice what was hidden in plain sight. History was not found only in archives and official documents. It lived in small details, in objects people carried, in messages quietly placed inside portraits, and in stories preserved for future generations ready to hear them. Ruth Price survived. She taught, she loved, and she created a legacy that reached far beyond her own lifetime. And now, more than a century later, her story was finally being told.